Welcome to State of Tech, Synchron's innovation podcast. Synchron is a leading global digital transformation consulting firm focused on financial services and big technology organizations. Our State of Tech podcast hosts subject matter experts and business leaders as they explore emerging technologies, industry insights, innovation trends, and more. Let's dive into today's episode.
Welcome to Synchron's State of Tech podcast. I'm Ryan Cox, head of AI at Synchron, and today we'll be discussing what might be one of the biggest shakeups in AI in a long time, DeepSeek. And to break it all down, I'm joined by Anantha Sharma, head of architecture and strategy for AI.
Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Anantha. So DeepSeek came fast and is one of the most downloaded free apps in the US within a week of launching. I mean, that's huge. We'll look at that, and we also look at some of the big hyperscalers, Amazon, Microsoft, and they've made these models accessible from their infrastructure as well in a safe and secure way. I think it's been really important that you've personally been playing with the model in an air-gapped environment. So clients and colleagues are asking, what does this mean for them?
This has been one of those moments where a huge change has happened in the industry, and we're seeing that change affected right from the stock market to basically everything. DeepSeek isn't a solution that came from one of the big US tech names. It's a Chinese startup that claims to have built a model that's comparable to GPT for a much lower cost to build it. And this was compared to what OpenAI, Google, and Meta have been able to build and spend on these models. The curious part is the quality of the output and the depth of reasoning these models bring in. Compare that with the size of these models and the amount of compute they actually require to run. It's just an amazing prospect.
Yeah, and that number, the 5.6 million, really flips the script on things that people have been thinking about for AI development. Usually the view is that from an AI perspective, you need those massive budgets, you need the latest chips, enormous compute resources. And so I think by having DeepSeek launch this, that's proving there might be another way. Even if you take aside, is the $5.6 million number real? There's some conspiracy theories out there on the web. Even if that is true, are we actually still even comparing apples to apples? This is a final training run. So is that the right comparison when we look at these costs?
I wouldn't say apples to apples would be the right way of looking at it, because the way these models are built, it goes back to the adage, garbage in, garbage out. The quality of the model strongly depends on the quality of the data you feed it. So if you look at performance scores of models, say GPT 3.5 to GPT 4 and so on, early on, we didn't have such high quality, clean, structured data to train these models, which meant that the quality of the output was not that great. Again, garbage in, garbage out. But as time went on, we were able to use models to generate better outputs and better content and use that to train better models. And DeepSeek looks like, again, nobody has officially accepted it, but based on conversations that you have with DeepSeek and things, it looks like they've used output from ChatGPT, like O1 Mini and O1 and so on. So that just means that they started off with very high quality data, and that also translates into much better models. And their architecture approach is slightly different as well, which makes sense on the outside. We're basically building denser models. So this would actually influence the quality of the generated output, which explains why these models are good. But again, to your point, the 5.6 million number, it's difficult to confirm or deny that in either directions.
And I think too, it being a final training run, when you look at it, you're doing one final run and only counting the cost of that, as opposed to things like OpenAI. You look at numbers that say 100 million plus, that includes a lot more things, including the hardware and multiple runs. And then you mentioned a great point that potentially DeepSeek is running off some of the high quality data produced by these other models. So there's a little bit of an unfair advantage if you're truly comparing dollar for dollar. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it seems like there's been some advancements in approaches. But let me ask you this. Is AI development, from your perspective, optimized more for cost or capability?
I think it's getting optimized for capability. Cost has been considered as a given, that you have to accept the cost so that the capability is something that comes out. So that's where you see costs balloon out, where you have $100+ million being spent in building one model. Just like any other AI-based system or any other machine learning systems, most of the time and effort is spent in data cleanup, data engineering, and other activities. And the model training itself is not that expensive when you consider the overall scale of things. From that standpoint, we are focusing on building more and more capable models. So the cost tends to add up. And at some point, we realize there's a better way of doing things, which is what DeepSeek is pointing us toward. And that's changed the perspective a little to say, maybe we can keep the cost down as well in some ways or the other.
So what are some of those architectural optimizations and improvements that DeepSeek has made to improve that efficiency? This is how we're going to optimize these models. This is what we're going to see going forward. So what did DeepSeek do differently? And do you think others will copy?
What they did is they used reinforcement learning to help the model do better in chain of thought activities. So they extended that capability. There have been a lot of research papers that talk about things like reflection and other capabilities. And those things, they used reinforcement learning to instill that capability and distill the knowledge that it already has. And that way they created a much denser model and much more capable model. And that's the approach that they took.
I guess in terms of the implications of that, are we going to see a flood of new models? And will it be more impactful when we think about these efficiencies and stuff at the foundational model levels, like the big ones, the OpenAI O1, or more at the distilled models, those smaller ones that are maybe a little bit more specialized that someone might want to deploy to do something a bit faster, cheaper, but a little bit narrower in scope?
In the last year, we've been talking quite a lot about figuring out where these smaller models can be used and the value that they bring, be it compute efficiency, be it edge computing, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that they lacked was the ability to reason through things, because it's not enough for the system to just understand English words. The ability now that we have is that even a model as small as 1.5 billion parameters is capable of doing some degree of reasoning. It obviously is not going to write like a 10,000 line code, but it is capable of doing some heavy set reasoning activities for those small scenarios. And that is the direction things will take going forward.
We're definitely seeing a differentiation between the models. Like some models are better at documentation, some are better at writing code, some are better at reasoning, as you mentioned. And there's also the view where that governance comes in and the scoring comes in. There's a lot of these open weight models like DeepSeek, and that gives enterprises a lot more flexibility. But I think it shifts more of the responsibility to some of the companies using them. Some of the proprietary models, OpenAI, they work really closely with their customers on building in security, compliance, and helping their clients be successful for some of the regulation. Versus the open models, almost the entire burden of things like bias mitigation, security, regulatory compliance is really pushed back to the organizations deploying those models. That's not a small burden. So some of these models are developed with content restrictions, maybe in areas like China, and those areas have different regulations around sensitive topics. Companies integrating these models need to make sure they aren't unintentionally exposing themselves to legal, ethical risks.
Absolutely. The governance component is a major part of this entire activity that's happening. The way software was being evaluated, the security review and other evaluations you would do when you get a vendor software was in some ways lacking when you're dealing with, let's say, a vendor-based language model that even does simple things like classification and stuff. But when you add in the capability of large language models and the capability of reasoning on top of that, the expectation on the governing body is going to go up. And of course, when you take these open weight models, the entirety of that governance weight falls on the organization that's implementing this. There are, of course, ways to tackle them. And those techniques are also very much in their early stages to try and figure out what's the best way of assessing if this model is going to be within the boundaries of what you want it to do. There are a lot of these areas that needs further exploration. And I'm sure there are tons of people who are just thinking through and figuring out solutions on this, including our own teams here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something we're seeing firsthand, and certainly you're seeing it firsthand. You've been playing around with the 32 billion parameter model that DeepSeek's put out. What are some of the strengths and weaknesses you're seeing? What are you learning as you're going through this?
It's a powerful model for sure. It has tons of capabilities, and they show up in various different ways. It is difficult to give it a problem that it doesn't quite understand or doesn't truly understand fully, which means that it's going to definitely put its best foot forward trying to answer a particular question. A very good example is giving it riddles. You just make up a riddle on the spot. It takes a lot of time. One of the crazy riddles that I had given, it took about 300 seconds to think through and come back with an answer. And it did come back with an answer. That's just pure play reasoning. So this is a huge advantage that it carries because you don't quite need to fine-tune models anymore. So long as you have contextual information that's available, and give it some boundaries where it needs to live within to come back with an answer. This also talks back to the governance side of it, because how are we going to define these boundaries, and how are you going to ensure that they have not been crossed while the reasoning is going on or while the model is quote unquote thinking? What are your thoughts? What do you think? Are we moving toward a world where companies and enterprises will have to use multiple AI models instead of relying on just one?
Different models are better at different things. Some can handle your riddles and others can write your code. So I think there's a lot of reasons why, and I think it will only continue as these models are trained on different data sets and they have different capabilities that we're seeing. It only makes natural sense that enterprises are going to want the best of all of these worlds and not just rely on one or even two models. So I think that's going to be an important theme as we go forward. It's really important that organizations understand how to score and both quantify and qualify these responses that are coming back. Because how do you know that you want to use a certain model in certain scenarios? You're, of course, going to need to be able to test that and understand which models are better at certain things. So I think that's going to be an important trend, but organizations certainly need to put those frameworks around it to be able to test and check how these models are doing at a point in time and also over time. As these models evolve, as the data sets evolve, things are going to be changing. So you constantly need to monitor and validate what's happening. And at the end of the day, it will then be about flexibility once you get those guardrails in place. From your perspective, are you seeing some benefits in your own testing on hybrid AI model approach?
Yes, this would definitely lead us down the path of needing less fine-tuning on existing models, which means that you will have multiple models that you would use for specific purposes and reasons. Relying less on fine-tuning just translates into a lot less startup cost on getting these systems up and running, and you'll be more easily ready to onboard the next version of Llama 3.5 or Llama 4.0 or something else that would come through with additional capabilities that is relevant to whatever the activity that you're trying to do out there.
I completely agree. So I guess from my perspective, just to share what businesses can do to prepare for this evolving AI, and particularly as you look at regulations and we're talking about governance and model validation frameworks, I think there's a couple key takeaways. We've talked about establishing robust governance and compliance frameworks, conducting regular risk assessments and audits, just like you would with both new technology and existing technology as those systems get built up, prioritizing data privacy, security, and really ensuring that you comply with things like GDPR, CCPA, and other regulations by integrating data protection, those impact assessments, and other sorts of anonymization techniques. I think that becomes really important. And then finally, monitoring regulatory developments and adapting to them proactively instead of reactively is going to be critical as these things continue to move. Building strategic partnerships is one way to help manage this. If your teams are already flat out and overworked on a number of these areas, certainly building out those strategic partnerships is an important aspect and an important approach to how you can handle these. So I think that's really, to me, the takeaway of how do you prepare in this really fast moving world.
Absolutely. The space is evolving incredibly fast.
And companies that succeed in AI are really going to be the ones that build the best validation and compliance frameworks around them.
Totally agree. And I think the next year is going to redefine everything we thought we knew about AI.
All right. And so to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. AI innovation is accelerating, and we'll be here to break it down every step of the way. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Synchron State of Tech podcast. Don't forget to like and share this episode, and subscribe to stay up to date on all of the latest and innovative technologies savvy businesses need to know about. To learn more about Synchron, head to our website at www.synchron.com. Stay tuned.